Remember those who have been grazed by the tip of death's wing and feel the heart naked. Let us pray for the living. My reading this morning is from a novel called My Name is Asher Lev by Chaim Potok. It's about a young Jewish boy growing up in Brooklyn in an extremely Orthodox family. They disapprove of his dream of becoming an artist and frown upon his passion for sketching and drawing, believing that it infringed upon the commandment not to make graven images. But he can't repress his creative desire, and he continues to sketch the world around him as he describes in this passage. And I drew too the way my father once looked at a bird lying on its side against the curb near our house. It was Shabbos, and we were on our way back from the synagogue. Is it dead, Papa? I was 6, and could not bring myself to look at it. Yes, I heard him say in a sad and distant way. Why did it die? Everything that lives must die. Everything? You too, Papa? And Mama? Yes. And me? Yes, he said. Then he added in Yiddish, but may it be only after you live a long and good life, Asher. I couldn't grasp it. I forced myself to look at the bird. Everything alive would one day be as still as that bird? Why? I asked. That's the way the Ribbon Shel Olam made his world, Asher. Why? So life would be precious, Asher. Something that is yours forever is never precious. From time immemorial, people have wondered about the mystery of life and death, the rhythms and cycles of the season and of our lives. And when a loved one dies, we appropriately gather to honor their memory, to grieve, and to find comfort in the company of family, friends, and religious community. Beyond the death and remembrance of any one individual, religious communities have also often set aside a particular season or day of the year to commemorate all those who have died and to reflect on our own mortality. There is something about this season of the year that especially lends itself to meditations on death and dying. In the Celtic spiritual tradition of my Irish ancestors, there's a lovely old teaching that heaven and earth are never more than 3 feet apart. And in what are called thin places or thin times, that distance is even smaller, so that this world and the other world are separated merely by a filmy veil, no more substantial than a spider's web. Traditionally, the autumn season is said to be that time when this veil between worlds is the thinnest of all, a sheer, translucent, porous, and permeable layer. The ancient Celts and other indigenous people saw this season as a time when this boundary was thinnest, a mere gossamer veil, masking the difference between life and death. It was when the departed returned to their homes, seeking warmth and sustenance and companionship. Many of the customs of Halloween derive from this tradition, of course, and All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day are later Christian incorporations of those traditions into their own calendar. I've always thought that All Souls' Day should be a high holy day in our Unitarian Universalist tradition. Certainly that was the case for our Universalist ancestors. At their annual convention in 1880, the Universalist Church of America officially recommended, and I quote, that the first Sunday of November in each year be set apart as All Souls Sunday for a special celebration of our distinguishing doctrine, the scriptural truth that all souls are God's children, and that finally, by his grace, attending them, they will all be saved from the power of sin and will live and reign with him forever in holiness and happiness. Now, of course, our language has changed, becoming more gender sensitive, more diverse, and more secular. But the underlying desire still lives within us, the desire to affirm the truth that love is stronger even than death. That although we are mortal, the love that surrounds us and sustains us, that love is immortal, deathless. That divine love lives in us as sacred memory. Now, memory is not just inert information stored in a photo album or a file cabinet or on a computer's hard drive. Memory lives. Memories live in us and among us. Memories come alive in community. That's one way I like to think of religious community, as a place for memories to live. So this morning, during this thin time together, we are inviting our beloved ancestors to be present with us in this time, in this place, the sacred ceremony. We welcome them into our circle. In truth, of course, it is their circle, and it is they who are inviting us to take our place in it today, so that we may learn to become good ancestors ourselves when our time comes. I remember once attending a worship service in an Orthodox monastery on a remote island in Finland, just a few miles from the Russian border. It wasn't the first Orthodox service I'd been to, but something about that exotic locale and setting made me more attentive than usual to what was going on. I noticed that the walls were covered with icons, pictures of saints representing the great cloud of witnesses spoken of in the New Testament. And at the beginning of the service, the priest went around the sanctuary with his censer, smudging the congregation, as it were, creating the sense of sacred space, the magic circle within which we all sat, or stood, rather, in an Orthodox service. You stand at the then, as a part of the same process, he swung his censer so as to include in the congregation all of the saints who were depicted in the icons on the walls. And as the smoke rose and my eyes rose and I looked and saw, I thought, of course they're included. Of course they're part of this gathered community. They too were part of the service, part of the liturgy, part of this community that extends beyond this life. As ancestors present. There's a lovely secular version of this vision in Billy Collins's tenderly playful poem called "The Dead." He writes, "The dead are always looking down on us," they say, "while we are putting on our shoes or making a sandwich. They are looking down through the glass-bottom boats of heaven as they row themselves slowly through eternity. They watch the tops of our heads moving below on earth, and when we lie down in a field or on a couch, drugged perhaps by the hum of a warm afternoon, they think we are looking back at them, which makes them lift their oars and fall silent and wait like parents for us to close our eyes." Feel free to close your eyes, if you will, in this moment, and call to mind someone you have known and loved who has died. Perhaps it's the person whose name you wrote on a leaf or someone else, but form an image in your own mind's eye, or recall the sound of their voice or the touch of their hand. And say the name if you'd like, or simply hold it in your silent awareness. Along with honoring our ancestors, All Souls Day is also an opportunity to remember and reflect upon our own mortality. In my many years as a minister, I've attended at the bedside of many, many dying patients and been present to the grief of many survivors. I've learned a lot about death as a witness and a pastor. But still, it's a completely different thing when it's your own death that's at issue. Death looks different when you're looking at it from the inside, so to speak. It's the difference between knowing about something, maybe even knowing all about something on the one hand, and knowing it even imperfectly from within, personally and existentially. Leo Tolstoy's great short story, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, better than any other passage in world literature, I think, expresses this difference between an objective, abstract view of death, death in general, something out there on the one hand, and the utterly personal and existential encounter with one's own unique and unrepeatable death. This is the passage. As a schoolboy, Ivan had learned the standard logical syllogism. Caius is a man, men are mortal, therefore Caius is mortal. But he hadn't really grasped its deeper significance. Tolstoy writes, that logic had always seemed to him correct as applied to Caius, but certainly not as applied to himself. That Caius, man in the abstract, was mortal was perfectly correct. But he was not Caius, not an abstract man, but a creature quite separate from all others. He had been little Vanya, with a mama and a papa, with Mitya and Volodya, with the toys, the coachman and a nurse. What did Caius know of the smell of that striped leather ball that Vanya had been so fond of? Had Caius kissed his mother's hand like that? And did the silk of her dress rustle so for Caius? Had he rioted like that at school when the pastry was bad? Had Caius ever been in love like that? Could Caius preside at a court session as he did? Caius really was mortal, and it was right for him to die, Ivan concludes. But for me, little Vanya, Ivan Ilyich, with my thoughts and emotions, it's altogether a different matter. It cannot be that I ought to die. That would be too terrible. There's something deeply primal about the fear of death. It's just too terrible. When death comes, like the hungry bear in autumn, says Mary Oliver, or like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, it brings up fear. And death is terrible. And the loss that we suffer with death is real and final in a real sense. And yet, the deepest hopes and intuitions of humanity have always insisted that death is not merely termination or extinction. What happens after death? I don't know. Every tradition imagines something different: reincarnation, resurrection, immortality of the soul, nirvana. Personally, I'm agnostic about the specifics of the afterlife. I'm reminded of a story about the people who asked the Zen master, what happens after we die? I don't know, he calmly replied. What do you mean you don't know? You're a Zen master. Yes, he said, but I'm not a dead Zen master. What lies beyond the threshold of death remains unknown to us, and yet the dead remains somehow close and present to us, inasmuch as we continue to be bound by connecting interwoven threads that lie even deeper than the grave. The dead have a pact with the living, we heard. The great round of life goes on after any individual's death, and we experience this life more fully when we recognize our own finitude, our own mortality, as well as our continuing connection with those who have died. What does it mean to be an ancestor? In her beautiful book, Race and Cosmos, the theologian Barbara Holmes defines ancestors as elders who pour their lives into the community as a libation of love and commitment. They live and die well, and when they transition, they do so in full connection with an engaged community. Thereafter, they dwell in the spaces carved out by our spiritual and cultural expectations. They may be in another life dimension, but they connect with us in dreams, in memories, and in stories. And the stories reveal a promise that the community will continue beyond the breath of any one individual, and that all transitions will be well attended by relatives from the other side. The end result is that I know that I am not alone. I am connected to the past and the future by the ligatures of well-lived lives, the mysteries of beyondness, and the memories and narratives that lovingly bind and support me. May we live our lives in a way that when we die, we join such ancestors. Death is universal and inevitable. Love is universal and immortal. This great love surrounds us and includes us and sustains us and transforms us. That, in a nutshell, is the message of universalism. It is not that our pain and suffering and grief in the face of death is somehow magically erased or sponged away. But when our grief is placed in the context of this overflowing love, this infinite compassion, it makes all the difference. So today, on All Souls Day, I invite you to entertain the possibility that we are immersed in a sea of infinite love, a love which exceeds our ability to comprehend, and that we are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses, not only the communion of saints, but the communion of all creation, the communion of all souls. I invite you now to turn in your gray hymn books to responsive reading number 720 in the back.